Tensions in the Middle East escalate further as Israel pounds Hezbollah targets in southern and eastern Lebanon, with civilians also paying the price.
My children and I were at home, working and relying on God for support when the Israeli enemy hit us. They are just children.
As tens of thousands flee, Hezbollah responds with its own strikes, and world leaders call for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's backer, Iran, seeks to restart nuclear negotiations with the West. And the head of USAID warns of the humanitarian price of Israel's expanding conflicts.
The risk of escalation and expansion of a conflict that has already displaced tens of thousands of people on the Israeli side, on the Lebanese side, on top of the crisis in Gaza with all of the human consequences of that, it would be catastrophic.
Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Allie Rogan. Israel's simmering conflict with Hezbollah along its northern border with Lebanon has boiled over. On Monday, the Middle East saw its deadliest day since October 7th, as more than 1,000 Israeli airstrikes targeted what the Israeli Defense Forces said were weapons that Iran-backed Hezbollah was hiding in Lebanon. Lebanese authorities say those strikes killed almost 500 and wounded more than 1,600. Nick Schifrin filed this report.
In towns across southern and eastern Lebanon today, at more than 1,000 sites, an avalanche of airstrikes. Lebanese across the region said today felt like the beginning of war. Thousands of families fled, cramming everyone they could fit into every vehicle they could find, even those shattered by shrapnel.
Strikes, warplanes, destruction. No one is left there. Everyone has fled. We took our belongings and left.
Since October the 8th, Hezbollah has fired thousands of rockets into Israel, including yesterday, outside Israel's third largest city. And Israel says its goal is to return some 60,000 residents to now empty northern Israeli towns.
I promised that we would change the security balance, the balance of power in the north. That is exactly what we are doing. We're destroying thousands of missiles and rockets directed at Israeli cities and Israeli citizens.
And Israel expanded its targets today, warning residents to leave any homes with weapons in the Bekaa Valley, where Hezbollah was founded decades ago near the border with Syria.
We advise civilians from Lebanese villages located in and next to buildings and areas used by Hezbollah for military purpose, such as those used to store weapons, to immediately move out of harm's way for their own safety.
Israel said the targets were Hezbollah, but Lebanese officials say Israel also struck hospitals, medical centers, and other civilian infrastructure. It is a dangerous, violent escalation, one day after Hezbollah leaders promised their own escalation.
We don't need to make threats, and we won't specify how we will respond to aggression. We've entered a new phase titled Open-Ended Battle of Reckoning.
But over the last week, it's been Hezbollah that's faced unprecedented attacks. Their walkie-talkies and pagers turned into bombs, injuring thousands and killing nearly 40. And on Friday, an Israeli airstrike in southern Beirut killed the founder of Hezbollah's Special Forces Unit, but also dozens of civilians who faced the brunt of the violence, the UN said today.
What we've seen over the last week has been dramatic. The consequences on civilians has been huge.
Today in Washington, for at least the fifth time in the last week, President Biden urged restraint.
My team is in constant contact with their counterparts, and we're working to de-escalate in a way that allows people to return to their homes safely.
But if Israel's hope is that Hezbollah chooses diplomacy, analysts say this week's attacks will produce the opposite effect and is already leading to the very escalation from both sides the U.S. has been trying to prevent. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
The situation remained tense Tuesday as Israel said it killed a senior Hezbollah commander in Beirut. Hezbollah, meanwhile, launched missiles at Israeli military and civilian sites. Nick Schifrin continues his reporting.
In Beirut today, the sound of sirens after an Israeli airstrike hit a residential building, leaving debris in the street. Damaged cars, and Lebanese authorities said 6 dead and 15 wounded. Israel said the target was a senior Hezbollah commander. Down the coast, Lebanese stood in what used to be their homes after bombings crushed the village of Aqabia. To the east, in the Bekaa Valley, residential buildings turn to rubble. And in southern Lebanon, the strikes continue. Israel says its targets are hidden Hezbollah weapons, but this week's victims include children like Musab al-Mala and his mother Aziza Ali Obeid.
My children and I were at home, working and relying on God for support when the Israeli enemy hit us. They are just children.
The strikes have caused tens of thousands to flee their homes to cities that can't cope.
No doubt that the circumstances we are facing today are extraordinary with the aggression we are witnessing.
But Hezbollah continues its own aggression, including on this Israeli highway. Hezbollah has fired thousands of rockets into Israel, today hitting this supermarket in the Arab-Israeli city of Tamra.
Luckily, there were no physical injuries, but there have been victims of trauma in the city.
Hezbollah is part of Lebanon's government and offers social services. But today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hezbollah and its leader must be removed.
Nasrallah is leading you to the brink of the abyss. He is endangering your country. Rid yourselves from the grip of Hezbollah.
7,000 miles away, President Biden again called for de-escalation.
Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible.
U.S. officials are trying to use the UN General Assembly to prevent all-out war. But a senior State Department official argues airstrikes designed to push Hezbollah to negotiate will lead to escalation.
Today is the fourth time I've had the great honor of speaking to this assembly as President of the United States. It'll be my last.
Today was President Biden's UN swan song, his final speech to the international community, after a half-century career often focused on foreign affairs, with a worldview defined by international collaboration and a hope that served as today's bookends.
I entered public life not out of despair, but out of optimism. Things can get better. We should never forget that.
Biden acknowledged the wars that shadow this year's assembly. Gaza.
Bring the hostages home and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip. Ease the suffering in Gaza and end this war.
On Wednesday, Nick spoke with Jeff Bennett about Israel's preparations for a possible ground invasion into southern Lebanon.
Nick, how tense is the situation along the border right now?
It's extremely tense, Jeff. This has been the deadliest week in Lebanon for decades, and that violence continued today. Israel said that it struck some 350 Hezbollah sites, including some associated with the Intelligence Directorate, to, quote, make it more difficult for Hezbollah to produce an intelligence assessment. Lebanese authorities say the strikes killed 50 on top of the more than 550 killed the previous 2 days. But meanwhile, Hezbollah continued its own strikes into Israel, including its hit villages near the border, wounding at least 2 civilians. Hezbollah also launched its first ballistic missile at Tel Aviv. It was intercepted by Israeli air defense. But as you said, Jeff, Israel went further today than it has in the past, calling up 2 reserve brigades to deploy them to the northern area along the Lebanese border. And the IDF's chiefs of staff, Herzi Halevi, warned today that troops needed to prepare for, quote, possible entry into Lebanon.
We are preparing the process of a maneuver, which means your military boots will enter enemy territory, enter villages that Hezbollah has prepared as large military outposts. You will go in, destroy the enemy there, and decisively destroy their infrastructure. These are the things that will allow us to safely return the residents of the north afterward.
And that is what Israel says is its goal, returning the 60,000-plus residents who have been displaced from their homes since October the 8th, when Hezbollah opened fire into Israel.
So what does de-escalation look like now? What is the U.S. doing to try to prevent an all-out war?
President Biden admitted today that an all-out war was possible. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the risk of escalation, quote, acute. So they have been scrambling, and they all are in New York with the entire international community. So that makes it possible for them to have meetings with partners and allies. And Western officials, U.S. officials tell me that those partners and allies have been Europeans, Arabs alongside Israel. And 2 U.S. officials confirmed to me that the U.S. is proposing a temporary ceasefire along the Israel-Lebanon border. It's not ready to be announced yet. One official called it, quote, pretty limited and short-term. But the idea here, Jeff, would be to stop the violence, again, temporarily, in order to try and have a conversation that they've been having for months, which is a diplomatic agreement that would push Hezbollah back past the Litani River, which on average is about 6 miles north of the border, beyond Hezbollah's anti-tank weapons. That's really what Israel wants. And that is prescribed by Security Council Resolution 1701. So Hezbollah was already supposed to be doing that. One of the leading partners that is helping the U.S. with this is France. They are hosting a Security Council meeting right now over Lebanon, and whose president, Emmanuel Macron, said today that he was ensuring that a diplomatic voice can be heard.
Il ne doit pas. Il ne peut pas.
We must not. We cannot have a war in Lebanon. There cannot be a war in Lebanon. This is why we urge Israel to cease this escalation in Lebanon and to Hezbollah to cease this missile launch to Israel.
Senior U.S. officials tell me that they believe Hezbollah and Iran do not want an all-out war in Lebanon, but Hezbollah has to respond in a serious way to those unprecedented attacks that you mentioned at the top, especially using pagers that really hit Hezbollah fighters where they're most vulnerable. U.S. officials also believe that Israel is willing to go to war and obviously is trying to make it clear to everyone that it is with this announcement today and the movement, but that they're hoping Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to forego an invasion. But it's still not clear, Jeff, how any step that Israel could take could really get all of those residents back to their homes.
So what would an Israeli invasion of Lebanon look like?
It would be devastating. Devastating to southern Lebanon, to the people who live there, to Lebanon's economy, which is already in shambles. Take a listen to Lebanon's Foreign Minister, Abdullah Habib, talking to the Carnegie Endowment's Aaron David Miller.
It's all destruction by destruction and nothing. And the people are hurt. Both people are hurt. Israelis are hurt. Lebanese are hurt. While we can find a solution. The more we think about it, is the United States is the key to our, I would say, salvation, if I can say, use this word.
Salvation, that's an incredible word, Jeff, to hear from him when the U.S., of course, is giving Israel the weapons that it would be using in Lebanon. Bottom line is, though, that their hopes are on the U.S., on the West, trying to get some kind of deal that would push Israel to withhold any kind of invasion, and that would somehow get Hezbollah to, again, who doesn't want a full-scale war, but has to respond to those pager attacks, that response to be under the threshold that Israel needs it to be, and somehow move from that to the point where residents can get home. But that's a very, very difficult task.
Yeah, more to come. Nick Schifrin, thanks for this great reporting as always.
Thank you.
On Thursday, on the sidelines of the UNGA, President Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron released a statement alongside G7 allies and key Arab partners calling for a 21-day ceasefire along the Israel-Lebanon border.
So, Nick, what do we know about the proposal, and how has Netanyahu responded?
The proposal is for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah, what a senior administration official last night called a, quote, breakthrough. But, as you said, Netanyahu landed in New York this afternoon and said the military campaign would continue.
My policy, our policy is clear. We are continuing to hit Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we achieve all of our goals. First and foremost, returning the residents of the north safely to their homes.
And indeed, today, Israel struck Beirut and said it killed the head of Hezbollah's drone unit. Israel also released video of troops practicing for an invasion of Lebanon. Now, we asked John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, whether Netanyahu has backtracked from his support, and he reiterated that Israel, quote, was fully informed and aware of every word of the ceasefire proposal before they released it, and the U.S. would not have released it unless they understood that Israel supported it. So Kirby did not say whether Netanyahu had backtracked, but we obviously have a very different public and private message from Netanyahu, and that is nothing new for Netanyahu, says Dan Byman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Netanyahu has a history of trying to play both sides on this, where he will at times appear to make concessions to U.S. officials, but then backtrack in the face of domestic politics. Some of what the U.S. is looking for was relatively vague. Would people agree in principle to X? But it requires both sides to make concessions, and Netanyahu may be reluctant to publicly agree to anything until he knows significant Hezbollah concessions are in the bag.
And Namna, it's just not clear whether Hezbollah is willing to make the concession the U.S. is demanding, U.S. and Israel moving back from the Israeli border.
Nick Schifrin, thank you as always for your reporting.
Thank you.
Amid the ongoing conflicts, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu spoke a day apart at the UNGA.
I come to you today as my people, and for almost a year now, are subjected to one of the most heinous crimes of our era. It is a crime of a full-scale war of genocide that Israel is perpetrating. Israel, the occupying state. A crime that so far has killed more than 40,000 martyrs in Gaza alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents.
Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, was also at the UNGA this week. As Iran backs Hezbollah in the conflict with Israel, Grossi sat down with Nick to discuss Iran's nuclear program.
This week at the UN, you met Iran's new foreign minister, who is well known to you, a former nuclear negotiator for Iran. And you said you see a, quote, expressed willingness to re-engage with us in a more meaningful fashion. Why do you say that, and what does that actually translate to?
Because I was told so. I heard the foreign minister who said that. I also got a letter from President Pezeshkian during the summer indicating that his willingness to meet with me. And we are precisely one of the things we were doing with Foreign Minister Arakchi, whom I know very, very well and has a lot of experience in nuclear matters and negotiations. We are preparing the ground for that meeting, which should be in their own interpretation, should mark a clear progress, a turning point, as they say. So I have to see that there are lots of things that we need to discuss, and we are preparing for that.
So among the things that, of course, you need to discuss is a problem that's you've had for years, which is that Iran has failed to explain uranium traces found at undeclared sites. Do you believe that they are interested in finally providing those explanations?
Well, you know, I have to continue. I should never give up. I'm hearing a high official of a member state of the IAEA. Of course, there is a history, and we always have that in mind. But you know, we trust, but we verify. So we hope that this will be the case, and that we will be able, at long last, like you say, this has been going on for a long time, to move to a better place.
What about restrictions on some of your inspectors that Iran has placed? Do you believe that they might lift those?
They won't do that. They indicated, unfortunately, that the inspectors they have taken out of our roster of inspectors visiting different facilities in Iran, which have been taken out of that list, will not be restored to it. So I am frankly frustrated about this. But as I said to one of your colleagues, that ship has sailed. We continue. We will be, trying to do the best we can, and we will certainly do.
And the larger context for this, of course, is what you've called the turbocharging of Iran's nuclear program, enriching uranium up to 60% purity. Last month, the IAEA said Iran added nearly 50 pounds of highly enriched uranium, exceeding what it would need to create at least 3 nuclear weapons. Do you believe you understand that you can understand the baseline of Iran's nuclear program? And do you believe that that means you could have negotiations?
That is exactly what we want to do. We want to reestablish a credible baseline on, with regards to the material, with regards to the production capacities in terms of centrifuges and other things which are truly indispensable to prepare. I'm not talking about a final or a wide-ranging negotiation. I'm talking about preparing the grounds for that. If you don't have or the IAEA does not have the ability to say what is there, what is present there, then the basic foundations for a sound negotiation are simply missing. And I believe my Iranian counterparts understand this. So let's hope that this re-engagement, re-establishment of contact, my upcoming visit to Tehran will be a positive one.
Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And finally, as the conflict with Hezbollah intensifies, Israel is still locked in its war with Hamas in Gaza, with millions of Palestinian civilians caught in the middle. While at the UNGA, Amna Nawaz spoke with USAID Administrator Samantha Power about the struggle to get aid into Gaza amid the widening escalation in the Middle East.
I want to begin with some news today, and that is specifically out of a ProPublica report just today that they're saying that in the spring of this year, USAID submitted a report to the State Department that included an assessment that said Israel was blocking aid into Gaza, specifically medical and food aid. You know that would trigger the U.S. stopping weapons supply to Israel. Can you confirm that you sent that report, and if so, what happened to it?
Well, I think we have made very plain our desire to see as much aid as possible flow into Gaza, our concerns about a lot of the roadblocks that have been put in the way. I'm not going to comment on any report from today, from a long time ago, beyond to say that our focus is as laser sharp on that set of issues around access as the number of trucks flowing in today is not sufficient.
If I may, because the report is not just alleging that there are roadblocks, as you have lamented before, it's difficult to get aid in. They are alleging that Israel was deliberately blocking aid. In your assessment, have they been, at any point in this war, deliberately blocking aid?
Again, there needs to be improvement, and particularly in advance of winter. There also needs to be improvement, needless to say, in terms of civilian protection. Almost every day it feels like we wake up to a report of an internally displaced person camp or a school or a medical facility being subjected to fire. It's extremely challenging to fight in an environment where Hamas is deliberately using civilians as effectively human shields. But the responsibility, again, on every professional military is to fight in a manner that minimizes the harm to civilians.
As we speak here today, of course, the conflict seems to be expanding as well. There have been some leaders who are expressing concern about the way in which Israel is now waging war in Lebanon. The UNICEF chief said yesterday that reports of 24 children in Lebanon among the hundreds dead, and she urged people to adhere to international humanitarian law. Can you offer your assessment of the way in which Israel is waging this war? Are they adhering to international law?
Watching the risk of escalation and expansion of a conflict that has already displaced tens of thousands of people on the Israeli side, on the Lebanese side, on top of the crisis we were just talking about in Gaza with all of the human consequences of that, it would be catastrophic. And so all of our diplomacy, again, is invested in trying to contain this conflict. That is what this week at the UN is about, is pressing the parties to make sure that cooler heads prevail, because if you need a reminder of what conflict looks like, look at the human consequences in Gaza. You know, the fate of the hostages still hanging in the balance, the fate of Palestinian civilians. Look at the displacement that has already occurred in Lebanon, even with this lower grade conflict. So if this were to spiral further out of control, it will only be civilians who pay the price.
You have faced criticism, I think it's fair to say, from even within your own agency, staffers on your team who express a frustration with what they see as a hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy, that the U.S. continues to supply humanitarian aid on a large scale to try to get that into the people of Gaza at the same time that it's supplying Israel with weapons to continue to wage that war. And I know some of your staffers, it's been publicly reported, have asked you about what they see as the Biden administration being complicit in what they see as genocide being waged by Israel in Gaza. And one of the things they point out is the fact that you wrote a book on genocide. They've called on you to speak out or to resign. How do you handle that kind of frustration within your own agency, and what are you telling your staffers?
Well, USAID is an incredibly mission-driven agency where people come to work every day to save lives, to improve lives. It's honestly inspiring to work, including among those people who criticize me. They're incredibly talented people. They could be working in the private sector. Instead, they come to work every day to help people like the people who are suffering in Gaza. More than 40,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza, more than 13,000 children, more than 300 aid workers. I would honestly be disappointed if my staff were not in churn and pressing for more. And I just feel lucky that I'm in the government, in the room, engaging the Israelis, working with the team that's pushing for a ceasefire, because fundamentally that's what's needed most of all, because clearly none of us can be satisfied with where things are now in Gaza.
Do you share any part of their concern that there's a hypocrisy to the U.S. policy there?
I share their focus on the human consequences of everything we do, and that's why we have live debates inside the administration. It's also why President Biden in the General Assembly today just talked about the importance of a ceasefire.
USAID Administrator Samantha Power, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thanks so much for watching.